as a candidate. I thought you'd cleared that hurdle.
You know, when Rob did that, he spent hours and hours doing it, so we haven't changed it.
Well, gathering that many people to cheer like that had to be
we had to
quite
fill
the
the studio. It was quite an event. Yeah.
And tell them they were cheering for something else, right?
We had to lie a little bit. Yes.
Both of them.
Yeah. And that is the voice of Delegate Mike Hite. Welcome, Delegate.
Good morning. Great to be here.
We're also joined by Senator Jason Barrett.
Good morning. And with that intro, John mentioned that you were a candidate. When you're in the House of Delegates, you're always a candidate because
That's exactly right.
So it's really appropriate, I think.
And we're also joined by Senator Patricia Rucker.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we're going to do something a little different today. And then on the phone, we have Speaker of the House, Mr. Roger Henshaw. Roger, welcome.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
So we decided to do something a little different today. Usually we do a round table, but we decided to give the reins to John today to kind of throw some topics out there, and we'll just get through the first hour with Roger, and then Senate President Randy Smith will join us for the second hour. So we'll have a nice blend of delegates, senators, things like that, and we'll kind of go from there. But I would be remiss, Roger, if I didn't give you an opportunity to make a statement regarding the delegate-elect issue that we've had up here. Do you have anything to say from the House, or do you have a statement to make?
I do not. I've made statements about that, Mike, already. It's an unfortunate situation that we'll deal with accordingly. But there are ongoing proceedings now that really just compel all of us to be to be a little more reserved in our comments going forward.
Makes sense. So without further ado, we'll just turn it over to John, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, the order of battle here, I hope, is everybody talks a lot. And I don't know, taking turns.
Yeah, you got the right crew.
Got some politicians here.
So kind of expanding, I guess, on the issues of campaigning. This last campaign, I'm a relatively new voter in West Virginia, but I've been voting for things for many, many years, and I've never seen a series of campaigns as filthy as what happened during the primaries. And the fact that most of it was Republican on Republican, a lot of mistruths, untruths, lies were told, anything from certain candidates favoring the chemical castration of children to others that are grooming children for pedophilic activities. And sitting back here, I think what we've shown is that the negative campaigning seems to work, but it works by causing a lot of damages. The families get pulled into the dirt, and then the winners go on and they'll be seated in the legislature, so they will have won. What I'd like you all to talk about is the fact that nobody, I'm not casting aspersions to the individuals in the room, but everybody knew, people in responsible positions knew that the lies were the lies, but they didn't step up and say, well, come on, he's not really doing that sort of thing. My questions are, do we need a new set of rules? Should you have, not you individually, okay, the collective you, should fellow politicians take up and say, especially in the same party, right, say, look, what they just said about him or her is just not true, and try to get ahead of the social media onslaught that happens. I guess, Mr. Speaker, I ask you to go first and then throw it out free for all.
Yeah, I'd love to go first. I'd love to go first, John. Thank you. I want to take everybody back to 2014 when I ran for the House of Delegates the first time, and that was my first time ever appearing on a ballot. I was a new candidate at the time. I ran against an incumbent. The gentleman that was the sitting delegate against whom I ran was a 3-term delegate, and I had no opposition in the primary. But when general election season came around Independence Day, around summertime, I began to see a taste of what you're talking about, John. But it was in my favor. It was organizations and groups and entities, some from even outside the state of West Virginia, saying things about my opponent that were exactly what you're describing, that they were just simply false. And I know my opponent. I had known him for most of my life. He still today lives in the same community where I live. And I knew those things were false. And And I actually made some public statements about them at the time being false. But it wasn't up to me, because the folks running or sending the materials and making the statements were from a Washington, D.C. address, which I understand is near to Martinsburg, but it's a long way from Clay County where I live. And when I made an attempt to find someone to talk to about it, the response I got back was, we have a right to say whatever we want. And it ended up hurting me as a candidate, because I said things, or the voters don't distinguish between who's saying these things about an opponent. Now, in response to that, folks who were supportive of me then began to do exactly the same thing, who were supportive of him then began to do exactly the same thing about me. So what he and I experienced, this has been 10 years ago now, was exactly a microcosm of what you're describing, that neither one of us were sending this garbage. Neither one of us had control over it, but we were both being victimized by it. It was an attempt to help the both of us, I think, but in reality it just brought the process down to a lowest common denominator, and it became a pox on everyone's houses. So I hate that practice. The Supreme Court of the United States has said that my policy is not constitutional, but if it were up to me, every campaign ad run by anyone anywhere would have to have some candidate put his or her name on it and say, I endorse the following.
Well, isn't that done already? I mean,
No, absolutely not. No. Absolutely not.
Not for independent expenditures and PACs, that they can do ads, do mailers, do, electioneer, basically, and it's not a candidate. So, and actually, our laws say that they must not work with a candidate. So if there is a PAC or a 501c4 or 6, I think there's a few of those that can do education-related things, we're not allowed to talk to them at all during the campaign season. We can't work with them. We can't advise them. We can't ask them to cease and desist. I mean, we can say it out loud in a public forum, like I have when I'm on the radio. I will tell you, every single campaign I've had has been horrible, negative, completely libelous. And if you have the money to sue, you can do that. You do have a remedy.
But it's usually after the fact, right? It's way after the election.
Oh, yes.
And then, John, I think from somebody like me, and I'm not talking as a candidate here, but as the radio station or as a media entity, we can't refuse a lot of this advertising. We can't say, hey, no, we're not going to play that. We have to take it as long as they pay for it. As long as they fill out the forms that they have to fill out, we don't have to check those forms. It's not our responsibility to make sure where the money's coming from or any of that stuff. So I know during the primary for the governor's race, the amount of money that was spent in that race and the amount of advertising, and that doesn't include the mailers and things.
But
Jason?
I just want to finish what I was going to say, which is, but I will actually challenge your introduction to this topic, because I don't think it works. I actually am proof every single time that I have been attacked and lied about, I've been able to still win. It has not worked. I think it actually hurts the other side that is doing the attacking. And I also want to point out that even when the other side is attacking and succeeds, I think they get less votes. And I have heard straight from constituents who say they really hate the negativity and it turns them off and makes them not want to vote for the candidate. So I do actually think it hurts the candidates who do it. So
yeah, and historically in the Eastern Panhandle, those negative campaigns have always hurt, except for maybe this last election.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I agree with that. I've seen some of these campaigns that have come out here recently, and I see the ones who are the most negative are the ones who are winning. I mean, Rucker-Doyle race proved that you can run a clean campaign with respect. But if you're on the Doyle side of that, you can say to yourself, well, maybe I should have ran a more negative campaign because I lost. So when you see people out there running campaigns and running really negative campaigns and then they win, it sort of speaks back to maybe not the public, but the politicians that, hey, maybe next time I need to run a different race. Maybe I need to be more negative, and maybe not to the extent where I'm calling somebody a pedophile, a groomer, whatever, but maybe to the extent that I need to point out my opponent's downfalls and issues, and make them speak back about if they're on the defense, then they're losing. I mean, that's always been a political rhetoric. So, I think this past, especially Republican on Republican, I think this past election showed that negative campaigns do work sometimes. Whether you like them or not, they do work.
I mean, I would agree. I think that they do work, and that's why people do them. But back to, John, kind of your original premise of your question about why is it Republican on Republican? And I think it's because, when you look at a general election where it's a Republican versus a Democrat, you don't really have to distinguish yourself in a lot of cases, especially in this area. You're with this party or that party. 80% of the people probably have their mind made up already based on your party affiliation. When you're in a Republican primary, especially in this area where most of the votes are cast, and when you're the challenger, you have an uphill battle. And I'm not going to defend any of the attacks that came this past cycle, but because they were pretty bad, a lot of them. But in order to distinguish yourself, you just, unfortunately, you don't have to, but what candidates do is they make these nasty negative attacks that aren't true, and they do a little bit of it. And I think to Senator Rucker's point, it's mostly done by these outside groups, these third-party groups, these independent expenditures that the average voter, and hell, sometimes we don't even know who they are. And I was attacked in my primary in 2022 by a group that had a address out of Raleigh County, and they did a bunch of negative digital ads against me, and it did have an impact in Jefferson County because I'm not as well known during that campaign in Jefferson as I was in Berkeley, and I lost Jefferson County by a couple hundred votes, and I know it's because of those negative ads. So I think they absolutely work. I outspent my opponent. I had more signs out. I sent mail out. I did the digital ads. I did all the things and still lost, but could win Berkeley County by 2-1 because I'm a known quantity more so in Berkeley than Jefferson, and people could see through that stuff. But to the voters that really don't know either candidate, when they see that negative stuff, and unless they have something to counter that, that's what they're going to believe. And you mentioned about other candidates coming to the defense of the candidates getting attacked. A lot of the times, and I don't want to speak for any of my colleagues here, but we tend to allow candidates to run their own races and try to stay out of that. And the old adage in politics is if you're explaining, you're losing. And so a lot of these candidates don't want to explain an attack. They just want to attack back. To your point, does it need to stop? Do we need to change things? I think we need to figure out a way to change things. And certainly the standard for slander or libel against an elected official is much higher than a private citizen, and it should be, but there also should be some limitations. And, I've seen a lot of the negative attacks. I've run some negative ads before. I don't think they were ever personal in nature. And, I know a lot of people will only take the high road. Senator Rucker is a prime example. She's been overcome a lot of negative attacks. She's going to take the high road. I'm going to mix it up with you a little bit because I'm just not going to take it.
Do you think that makes a difference, though, Jason, that Patricia and Paul knew each other? Like Roger was saying, he knew the person. We're from smaller communities. I know we're growing here. But when you know somebody, it's really hard to go negative, isn't it?
Well, but I think there's a difference between negative and false too, and a lot of these negatives are false. They're just untrue. So I think that's a distinction we need to make.
And the negative attacks happened in that primary, but it didn't come from Paul.
Yes,
and that's the point. It comes from other groups, and so there's a difference between a valid comparison of the difference of your records and showing that you are different, and just completely libelous. Nothing based on the truth, total twisting of things you said. Right. And I will tell you, that has happened to me every single time. And I've been able to prevail every single time. So that was the point I was trying to make. And I will say this. In most of the state races, so we're talking West Virginia, the reason for why it's becoming much uglier primaries because the Republicans are pretty much in control. They are the ones who are probably going to win. So as the stakes get higher and higher in that primary, then there's like this desperation.
So it's a race to how Republican are you?
Yes.
Is that because you know that the primary is
essentially the general?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, in a lot of these. And I will say, when it comes to our role, I very often do not want to bring up, because then you're actually amplifying the message of the attack.
Yeah.
So when you get in that scenario, if I am going door to door and talking to a voter independently, I will absolutely tell them like the truth, and I will say, listen, that ad was not true. Like, I know this candidate, and I know that this is not the truth. But in a public forum, to actually amplify the attacks and the lies, you're actually giving it even more of a credence, and more. Now you are helping spread that lie instead of actually trying to diffuse it.
Well, and some of them put people in a position. I mean, nobody wants to have tape of them saying, I am not a pedophile, right? Although I just created that, but that should not be in the open.
Yeah.
It's just, you talk about being on the defensive,
Yes.
right?
Sure.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me go back to you. Why is, with the amount of money that was spent, you said close to $1 billion? Is that what somebody in the like millions, certainly tens of millions of dollars are spent in the elections here in West Virginia from outside sources. We're 1/300th of the population of the country here in West Virginia. Where is the value in the outside from these outside entities to capture the West Virginia House, the West Virginia Senate, or the West Virginia Governor's Mansion?
Most of the entities from outside West Virginia who engage in that kind of substantial spending are people who are either looking to be or looking not to be trendsetters. So one of the things that happens, John, nationally is that as states begin moving one direction or another collectively with respect to public policy, other states follow suit. So when we attend national meetings of our colleagues from other states, every time, the topics often gravitate toward, well, how is your state regulating pharmaceutical distribution? How is your state regulating automobile emissions? How is your state regulating product safety standards on toothbrushes? Just make up something. And if you're in the toothbrush business, you want some sense of uniformity across the country with respect to how toothbrushes are regulated. So it becomes a decisional calculus and just a business decision for the toothbrush industry to decide that, it does make sense for the state of West Virginia to be one direction or another with respect to public policy, because we want to sell toothbrushes. And because we want to sell toothbrushes, we want to have some say over how toothbrushes get regulated in West Virginia, because that may ultimately influence how toothbrushes get regulated in Texas.
So you're saying we should probably invest in toothbrushes in West Virginia because there might be an economic development thing coming, Roger?
Mike, I recognize
there's a cliche there
halfway through it, but I was so I just had to see it through. But this John, Mike, this does give me an opportunity here to point out something that I think all the listeners need to appreciate, and that is the extent to which federal law triggers a lot of what we either do or are unable to do in the West Virginia State Legislature. So among the most frustrating things for me in my now having completed 10 sessions, and Jason, I think you've even got longer tenure than I have. How long? What do you have? In 12 years?
No, we're even, Mr. Speaker. I'm at 10.
We're even. Okay. Well, that among the most frustrating things for me has been the extent to which Congress and the federal executive branch agencies are unwilling to I'm going to go so far as to say do their job, but then file lawsuits against us to enjoin us when we take action that's considered to be preempted by federal law. So campaign law and the law around free speech are in almost exclusive part federal law. And when the state of West Virginia chimes in to try to regulate the content of speech in almost any way, that ends up being preempted by federal law. And that term preemption means taken over by. So federal law preempts West Virginia's ability to regulate in this space. So even if we were so inclined as to regulate the conduct of elections with respect to negative campaigns or the amount of money spent, we would almost certainly be struck down by the federal district courts and likely upheld by the appeals courts, because those areas of law are considered to be exclusively federal. And there's a multitude of examples of that, and it's very frustrating for us as state legislators, because across the country, state legislatures and state legislators are quite willing to work, and in fact are often willing to work together, much more so than our federal counterparts are. And that's not an indictment of those people, it's just a statement of reality. But yet we're unable to regulate and legislate in those areas because people immediately run to the federal courts and claim preemption and are successful.
I want to go back to say the way the lobbying, the money flows. So if Acme Toothbrush Company, they make all of the toothbrushes for the Roadrunners, right? That's along with the explosives, Acme. If the Acme Toothbrush Company approaches candidate Gilstrap, does it work this way? They donate a bunch of money to the Gilstrap campaign, and in the hope that I will then favor the new toothbrush regulation? Or is there a meeting where they say, candidate Gilstrap, here's the thing, we'd like to contribute to your campaign, but we expect you to do such and such?
Well, that would be unlawful.
Yeah, that's
so
unlawful.
The second meeting would be unlawful. So to all the candidates listening, if that meeting happens, you should report it. You should call the FBI and report it. But the first meeting happens all the time.
So the money just arrives in the campaign war chest, and a
lot of the time you don't even know, because your treasurer will get the thing. You just see it on your campaign report. I'd probably raise less money than anybody in this conversation, so I know where the checks are coming from. But when you're raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, these checks are just arriving at a mailbox.
Didn't you run unopposed?
I did.
Okay.
I did have my first campaign. I did have an opponent.
But you receive the checks or folks support you, they're not saying we expect you to vote a certain way. It's a question of we like what you're saying, or we support what your campaign is about, and we want to help you. If you're an incumbent, we like your record.
You have a voting record already.
Yes,
They've
exactly.
seen what you voted on. They've seen how you've conducted yourself.
But I think what Roger was inferring is about those outside groups who do have an agenda, and they may give to a PAC or one of these independent expenditures that we were talking about to be involved in the elections for or against someone. And those groups, again, we're not allowed to communicate with. We're not allowed to talk to. We're not allowed to advise.
Can your chief of staff?
No.
Nobody on the campaign?
No one on the campaign.
Okay.
No one at all.
There's no coordinating of campaigns between the actual campaign and the independent expenditure.
Do you think the negativity had an impact on voter turnout, which was actually, even during the primaries, was pretty abysmal? It's certainly in our area.
Berkeley County was the worst in the whole state. Yeah.
I actually think it's just the fact that we're a bedroom community. There's just so many folks here who are newly moved in, aren't really invested yet in the state, don't know the candidates, don't know the races. I think that influences the turnout.
And that's going to bring us to the end of our first segment already. You are listening to TV10 and WRNR. We'll see you in 2 short minutes. Welcome back to Eastern Panhandle Talk with the Friday Roundtable. We are joined by John Gilstrap, Senator Rucker, Senator Barrett, Delegate Height, and Speaker of the House, Roger Henshaw. We're going to move right into segment number 2, and I'm going to turn it over to John.
All right. Good morning again, everybody. We talked in the first segment a little bit. I think, Patricia, you were the one that brought up the race to the right among political candidates, Republican candidates. And coming off the general election, I think everybody's pretty much in agreement that the Democrats way overplayed their hand nationally, thinking that people were listening to the echo chamber of woke politics and identity politics and all of that, and they ended up losing the general election, and they lost pretty badly. Do we run as in West Virginia with the supermajorities? Are Republicans creating their own echo chamber that is shutting out moderate voices that will ultimately cause the pendulum to go back to the left? I pose that as a yes or no question. That's not how I meant it. But what are the dangers and how do we prevent that? And Mr. Speaker, I'll start with you again.
Sure. Okay. So if we back up again, John, I guess I'm going to be the historian on this call this morning. If we back up again a couple decades and we look at how the now minority party operated administratively, I'm not going to talk about policy for one. I'm going to talk about administration. We see that closed primaries, that the minority party at the time ran a closed primary, and it allowed the party to creep further and further in a direction that was inconsistent with the majority of voters here in West Virginia. At the time, the now majority party ran an open primary. We still have one today, although there's conversation about whether it becomes a closed primary in the next election cycle. I do think there's some concern for that, because if we look at the fastest growing demographic of voters, not just in West Virginia but nationally, it's the unaffiliated voter. So there is some conversation that needs to be had by party leadership around that topic.
I thought the decision had been made that the Republican primaries are going to be closed in the coming elections. That's still an open question?
I believe that vote was taken last fall. I think the effective date for it is the 2026 election, although I wasn't at that meeting, so I'm not absolutely sure about that.
That's right.
I think the short answer is absolutely. I think that's what the demise for the Democrats were here in West Virginia. And if you look historically in West Virginia, we were a blue state, and we were a blue collar type state where labor was a big issue. We've turned red, I think, because nationally the Democrats moved farther and farther to the left, and most of West Virginians, even though they were blue, they were moderate blues, what we call blue dog Democrats. And I think as the national Democrat Party moved farther and farther left, they couldn't get on board with it, and they either changed to independence or to the Republican Party. That doesn't mean they still don't hold on to those labor values and that blue-collar work ethic. So when you look at West Virginia and you see how red it is now, I think a lot of that has to do with we had that open policy of allowing anybody to vote in our primaries, and it just, people in West Virginia said, I can't go with the Democrat Party that far left. I think there's a danger now that the Republicans are making some of the same mistakes, that we can't also swing too far to the right, or we're going to lose all those people that we gained, and the pendulum will swing back the other way.
But if you looked at the election, Mike, even the registered voters down south, and correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, they're still massive pockets of Democrats, but they're actually voting Republican. They might be registered Democrat, but they're actually voting for the Republican candidate down south. And I thought that was a really kind of cool phenomenon.
And I do want to point out, in the statewide elections where it's more obvious to get an idea of where West Virginia is, the conservative choice ended up being the preference. So I do think, to a certain extent, we are representing the constituency of West Virginia, but in terms of the echo chamber that you were talking about, that's one of the reasons for why I think it's very important that as an elected official, we stay in tune with our community. We go to events. I think all of us here, are very active in our local area and the districts that we represent. Just talking to everyone who, I will tell you, again, door to door, you can't get a better instruction of where everyone is in your district, and you realize that neither the media nor social media represents the average voter. The average voter is very much kind of in the center between, the two extremes. Yes. And when you see that and you understand that, and that's who you're talking to, I think it helps balance.
So I'm the only one on this panel that has served in both the Well, the majority and the minority. I wasn't going to say that.
I was like, you're going there.
But what I was going to say is the supermajority in both caucuses of both the House and the Senate. And I can assure you neither of them are an echo chamber. I mean, there are, and I don't mean any of this disrespectfully, but there are certainly there's a labor caucus in the House of Republicans. There, you have the folks that are more of kind of a country club Republican. There are others that are extreme right on social issues and different things. And again, I don't mean any of those terms to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to identify the different factions.
There's 100 of us too. So
there's 89 or 8 of you, 90, whatever it is. But in the Senate we have 31, soon to be 32, and we kind of have some of that too. And so there are disagreements. There are we view things differently at times, different issues, different ways. So. I don't think we're approaching the echo chamber. I think that we have both caucuses. I think are really a big tent, and there are people that view a lot of different issues different ways. But to your point, I think that that is something that we should always be aware of and know that we could go down that road. But I think that from our caucus in the Senate, I think that these labels all the time about just being pro-business and pro-economic development or just worrying about social issues, but really I think that we've proven that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can take both those issues, the social issues that a lot of West Virginians care about, especially when they see this far left craziness that comes out of D.C. I think that West Virginia wants to push back on some of that, but they also understand that the importance of economic development. So I think from both the Senate and the House that we're able, again, to walk and chew gum at the same time to deal with all sets of those issues.
I'm just concerned that the rejection of the far left policies from Washington, which clearly have been rejected, is being misread as an acceptance of farther right policies. Like here in the Eastern Panhandle, I won't name names because it's not here but we sent, there's a delegate going to the State House whose whole platform involved no compromise. I have this is my principled stance. The government should not be involved in building parks and all kinds of stuff, and I will not compromise because this is what I feel. So maybe my worldview is limited by the number of folks that I talk to on this show, but that kind of approach frightens me, little f, simply because it's unworkable. I don't know. Thoughts?
But that's not the majority of the legislature. So it is possible for folks to get elected who are non-compromising and who are extreme. But fortunately, and this is why I think the legislative body is 134, it's not the usual. And you have to, one of the things I like to point out, which is the difference between the legislative branch and executive branch, we participate in a team sport where we have to work together and build coalitions, and we have to listen to those who don't necessarily see the same worldview in order to get bills through. So that process that we have, and it has to go through both chambers.
Yeah, so we have to work across the aisle.
Across the aisle and across the Capitol.
Yes.
And it does moderate the bills. It's very hard for a bill that is too extreme to get through that process. I'm just saying, so that's the legislative branch versus an executive branch, or versus, some of the local guys can be very extreme because they don't have to moderate like that. But we really do have to in the legislature.
Roger, your thoughts on that?
Well, for listeners, I think there's one of the most difficult things to often articulate is the fallacy of that line. Well, we need to run government like a business. No, we don't. It's not a business. It was never meant to be one, and it can't be thought to work like one. The founders of our country set up government to be messy, to be loud, to be slow. It's supposed to be hard to change the law in this country, because Americans set their lives up around an ordered structure based upon laws. We're not a country that operates based upon the decrees of monarchs. We are a country based upon laws made by elected representatives. And it's supposed to be hard to change the law. And if it takes a long time to get a bill through the legislature, you know what? That's not necessarily bad. if it takes a long time to make a change to the law, that usually is a sign that people are thinking about it, that people are asking, okay, what really will happen in the communities of West Virginia if we do this? That's supposed to be how the process works. It was never meant to be an assembly line style of efficiency. It was meant to be slow. It's supposed to be deliberate, and I, for one, am glad it is.
Are democracies or legislatures or is governance better when supermajorities, huge supermajorities, don't exist? Do you think having more balanced two-party system, not giving up leadership and not, but in general having with such it seems to me that Democrats in West Virginia are largely silenced at this point.
I don't know
that I agree.
Yeah, I think when you look at the 89 people in our caucus, for instance, you have differences all over. So while there might not be 45 Democrats, there are still people questioning, asking questions, doing things that we all come from different backgrounds too. So the great thing about West Virginia is our diversity. When you travel the state, the Eastern Panhandle is nothing compared to Wyoming County. So I think you've got people from all walks of life coming together, and I still think that keeps us. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but
we also talk about the supermajority a lot, and is that good for? I sort of look at it as there's extremes on both sides, and then there's the center. So there's not really a supermajority. We have extreme right in both houses. We have extreme left. Now, they're relatively small, but so is the extreme right that are relatively small. The group in the middle are made up of moderate Republicans, and a lot of times Democrats who were moderate that switched to Republican. And nothing against that. It's just that they found out I can't be to the extremes anymore. I either have to go independent or I have to be a Republican because I'm a moderate. And I think both houses are still made up of majority moderates. Now, if the Republican Party starts electing more and more to the extreme right, then you're going to see that pendulum swing back to the left a little bit. My hope is that's not for 25, 30, 50, 80 years.
Forever.
But that's what's going to happen. So I think as long as the moderates are the ones that are running policy for the most part, I think we'll be okay.
And one last point I want to make is that we are not closing the door to the Democrats.
Yeah.
We have Democrat constituents, all of us, and one of the reasons I had a good general, because my opponent, John Dole, is my constituent, and we have a great relationship. He knows I've never closed the door to hearing his ideas, getting his input. We represent all those folks.
And they were asking on social media why there aren't any Democrats in the room today. And obviously, in the Eastern Panhandle, we do not have any elected Democrats. So, I only had one spot on the phone, and I went right to the top of the House. So that's why we didn't have a Democrat in the room today.
Well, the two mics in the House here, Haidt and Hornby, if in the next election cycle, if somebody runs against you, they're going to come from your right.
I would suspect.
I would agree.
Suspect that.
So, and that's the kind of pressure that concerns me, because you can't, if you're being hammered for all the other stuff we talked about the first segment, right? People are there's money coming at, they're going to say things about you that aren't true, and so doesn't that force candidates who are otherwise moderate to pretend to be otherwise, or at least lean farther to the right in order to prevail?
I think I am who I am, and I run on my voting record, and everybody that knows me and knows who I've been in this community can look me in the eye and ask me any question. They know I'm not way right. I'm not way left. I'm certainly not a liberal. So I run on my record. So,
yeah, that's the nice thing about all of us. We have a record now, so you can actually look at our record. We can talk about our record when we're campaigning and say, a lot of these things that are being said about us just aren't true. Look at our record. This is how we voted, and I think that in the long run that could prevail. Now, is there going to be a push farther and farther to the right? Absolutely. I think there will be. We just have to fend it off. Or
John, this is
or
Roger.
people get what they vote for.
Go ahead, Roger.
Sure, Roger.
Yeah, I'm going to be the unpopular guy on the phone, okay? So since I'm not in the room, I'm going to take the unpopular position here and make a statement that I'm sure will incite some of the listeners to take issue with what I'm about to say. But I'm going to say it anyway because I believe it's important. These conversations typically become candidate-centric. But don't forget that voters have a responsibility here, too. We as voters in a republic have a responsibility to go into that voting booth informed. And if we allow ourselves to just simply be passive consumers of information and take what people feed us, then some of the responsibility is on us. We have a bit of an obligation as the voter to go into that voting booth informed also. So the blame does not rest 100% with candidates.
I would agree with that. Point. Yeah.
Which would also bring up in terms of advertising during the voting season. Actually, I didn't receive a lot of ads. My neighborhood's relatively new.
You're not bashing advertising, right?
I'm sorry. No. Advertising is great.
Okay.
But very little of what I received was actually issue-oriented. It wasn't about educating the voter about what's important to West Virginians. It was mostly about why the other candidate is such a bad candidate.
Well, and the problem with mail pieces that you're talking about like that, you go to the post office box or you go to your mailbox and you open it up and there are 10 or 12 of these things every day, and you have from the mailbox to the trash can to get a message out. And if your mail piece looks like the backside of it looks like a page of the encyclopedia, frankly, nobody's going to read that. They're just going to go on. So it has to be short, sweet, to the point, and drive whatever quick message you're trying to do. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's what you have. And when you're competing so much with all these other candidates, and good for Mike Hornby, you turn on WRNR from 8 to 10 during campaign season, and it's just one campaign ad after another, and it just becomes white noise to people, and they just don't want to hear it any longer. So, you have to do some door-to-door stuff. You have to the candidate has to get involved in the community, go where people are and have conversations with them, and don't just rely on a 30-second radio ad. Or
don't wait for campaign season, too. I found that coming on like with Rob, of course, I'm a little fortunate with this. I can come on whenever I want. But we have a pretty astute audience here, but it didn't translate into the ballot box with the amount of people that showed up in Berkeley County.
Yeah, that was really disappointing, especially in the primary. The turnout was extremely low, and I think sometimes voters just aren't engaged, especially in primaries. Why we had a record low, especially here in Berkeley County, I don't know. You mentioned it being a bedroom community, but we've always been a bedroom community, and that's no excuse.
It's
I'm going to take
worse.
Rogers.
have to tell you, it is worse. More and more folks are moving in, and it's really the folks invested in the community is becoming smaller and smaller. When I was going door to door, the number of people who had no idea about not a single race in the West Virginia.
Is it because Charleston is so far for us?
Well,
is that part of it?
Honestly, they're watching TV from DC, listening to DC radio stations, reading DC newspapers, and I can't blame them because they are recently moved in from the DC metropolitan area, from Northern Virginia, from Maryland. That's what I found over and over and over again. And so they just haven't acclimated themselves to knowing the folks here. So we need to improve that. But I'm just telling you, that bedroom community issue, yes, we've always been that, but it really is getting to be more.
The demographics different.
And we expanded, to Berkeley County's credit, has expanded early voting to multiple locations now.
Yep.
And that still doesn't translate to more people voting. Senator Rucker's right. The bedroom community plays some role in it. But when we have extended early voting times, dates, and when we have additional locations for early voting, I don't think there's an excuse for people not to vote, to be quite honest.
And our turnout, to Patricia's point, our turnout in the general was absolutely amazing. I mean, there were lines. The early voting was packed every day. It was very
And the funny
impressive.
thing is, and it's not funny, is that the voters are standing in line to go vote for something that we all know how it's going to turn out.
Right.
The races right now in this area and a lot of West Virginia are in the primaries. So if they really want their voices heard, and they really, the primary is where a lot of these decisions are made now.
But a lot of voters don't know.
They don't understand that. But, they all want to go vote for President Trump, and I understand and respect that. But we all know that's going to turn out in West Virginia. I mean, these local races that impact their everyday life in these primaries, and we have to do a better job of communicating that. But to Roger's point, they have to understand that.
Well, sometimes in a primary as well, especially in a presidential campaign, I think it hurts our primary when the presidential nomination has already been picked by the time our primary rolls around. We don't really, I don't know the last time West Virginia actually had a say in who the nominee was going to be for president because we're so late in the season. It's already decided.
But that's a great point, and that's what I want to ask. I think we've had this conversation with Roger personally. Have we ever thought about moving our election up, Roger, and do we get punished for that as a party or as a state?
No, so I can speak to that a little bit. So under at least the Republican Party's national rules, I'm not as familiar with the DNC rules, but under the Republican Party rules, you cannot move your primary ahead of New Hampshire and South Carolina, and Iowa. So as long as you're, and it's a little, I'm making it sound a little more simplistic than it is, but in general terms, as long as you don't move ahead of Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, yeah, we could move our primary up.
Could we join Super Tuesday?
Well, we did that one year. So I think it was the 2008 presidential election, we held a nominating convention on Super Tuesday. Rather than primary, we allocated our delegates that year by party convention, which many states do, by the way. That's a common denominator across many states around the country. But the Republican Party did do that in 2008.
How did that go over, Roger? Was it popular? What was the outcome or the kickback from that?
Well, I think most voters didn't understand it, frankly. And we've not tried it since that time. My understanding is it was largely an exercise in confusion, just because we only did it once and haven't done it since then. And there were a lot of reasons why that was true, but I think there were quite a few people who didn't understand the process that year. But the goal was to do exactly what I believe as Delegate Height on the show here this morning was saying. It was to make us relevant for the first time in decades, and it did. It did make us relevant that year. I was in the room. We had national presidential candidates actually show up. In the Charleston Civic Center to address our attendees that day because they wanted our delegates. We were on Super Tuesday. We were going to report we did report the outcome of that convention early in the afternoon so that CNN and Fox News reported on West Virginia all afternoon. We got extraordinary media coverage for it nationally, but we just haven't done it since then.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, that's a question for the state party executive committee. So that decision's not made by the legislature. That's a decision made by the party executive committees. So how the parties allocate their delegates to the national nominating conventions are exclusively questions for the state party executive committees. We actually don't weigh in on that as the legislature.
And I think there's a better chance of going that route than moving our entire primary up to March or April. Because think about when the legislature's in session.
Yeah.
Do the legislators really want to change the law to move the primary up when they can't campaign? For us to be my house is 306 or 7 miles from Charleston. How do I campaign when I'm doing my job? And so, and then you don't want legislators neglecting their job to campaign. And it's more important to do the job than get the job. And so, I think that we'd have to be very cautious about moving our primary up to where it would drastically impact campaign season and then potentially drastically impact legislators' ability to do the job people elect them to do.
But if we did it the way that they did it before,
then that's fine.
Yeah,
it's a little different.
Yeah. All right, Roger, we got about 60 seconds left. Leave us with some words of wisdom for the folks in the Eastern Panhandle.
Well, I want to take that opportunity to thank the folks in the Panhandle. I do it every time I'm on your show, Mike. I want to do it again here. I want everybody in the listening area to understand what a sacrifice delegates and senators from the Panhandle make to come to Charleston. So I go home every night. My house is, unlike Delegate Barrett or Senator Barrett, my house is 34 miles from the Capitol. I go home every night, sleep in my own bed, and see my kids every evening. I can't imagine what life must be like for delegates and senators who represent constituents in the Eastern Panhandle. I'm glad that we have men and women who are willing to do that job, make that kind of sacrifice. I have extraordinary respect for those of you who do it, because I know it's a fundamental disruption of your lives. My life doesn't get totally upended as a result of my service in the Capitol. Yours does, and I'm glad there are people like each of you who are willing to do it.
Thank you, Roger, for your time. We really appreciate it. I'll see you this weekend. You are listening to TV10 and WRNR Eastern Panhandle Talk. We'll be back in 6 minutes. Welcome back to Eastern Panhandle Talk. Sorry about that, folks.
You shouldn't have bragged about getting it right.
We were in deep conversation during the break, and now we're back. We will be joined by Senate President Randy Smith here shortly. He'll be calling in, so when he does that, we'll introduce him and we'll get there. Without further ado, let's go to the next topic. John?
All right. There's a program around here called Leadership Berkeley, of which I am a part. And I guess a few weeks ago, we met with various public safety groups and all that. Everyone seems to be counting on a 1% sales tax coming to Berkeley County in the coming year or two. Is there any chance at all that that's going to happen?
Well, put it this way, I don't think the legislature will vote to increase taxes.
Well, that's a home rule thing, right? Isn't that really the...
Yes. For me, I would not vote to increase taxes.
Would you vote for home rule?
I would not vote for home rule either. I would vote for the ability for the people of a county to vote for that. But that's just me personally. And I understand the county council...
1% of the collective voice?
Yeah, so for me, I think giving the vote to the people is the right thing to do. If they want services, if they want these things in their county, then I think you give the vote to the people.
I'll speak to it because I ran the bill last year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I ran the home rule bill for counties. And actually, I think there were a couple bills that ran last year. Mine specifically said it was a lot like the municipality home rule, where counties had the option of having home rule, and it went to a referendum. So it wasn't the county commission deciding that they were going to have home rule or they were going to impose a 1% sales tax. It went to the people. So each county got to have their own referendum, and they got to decide. Not the county commission. The people who would have to pay it got to decide whether or not they wanted home rule or the 1% sales tax. My particular bill also at the same time said that you had to do away with the stormwater management fee. If you instituted the 1% sales tax, the stormwater management fee,
the rain tax is what
the rain
call
tax
it.
had to go away.
Is that a wash? Terrible.
No, it's not a wash, but I've been campaigning since I very first started running to get rid of the stormwater management fee, the rain tax. I don't like it. I don't like anything about it. So that was sort of the push that if you're going to institute this, you have to get rid of stormwater management. Now, not every county has stormwater management, so it didn't affect a lot of them. Not every county is going to want this 1% sales tax or home rule because it doesn't benefit them.
The two are not the same thing, though. Home rule can introduce a sales tax, but home rule is not.
That is correct.
Defined by a sales tax.
That is correct. It just gives the ability of a county to say, I want, and it allows them to do certain ordinances and so on and so forth. But it also allows them to, if they choose, put to referendum the 1% sales tax if people want it. And I think one of the bills that ran, it made the counties, if you institute it, you had to specify what the money was going to be used for. So I'm in favor of it if it's a referendum, if it goes to the people.
I think there's a lot of angst for actual home rule because of what happened with the municipalities. I think, and I'm not saying why or how anybody did anything wrong, but there's a lot of legislators in the House that feel that the municipality home rule came back and bit them. And they don't.
In what way?
Well, the bill wasn't written really well, so you were supposed to be able to charge 1% sales tax, but you were supposed to get rid of the B&O tax.
Yeah.
However that was written, they didn't have to get rid of it all. They only had to take a chunk out of it. And
some municipalities eliminated the B&O on activities that don't exist in their municipality.
Yeah.
So it had zero financial impact at all to them. Now, what the legislators met with the county commission, the Berkeley County Commission, a few weeks ago. And what their plan is for this 1% sales tax, as I understand it, is a referendum, and it is to be used for public safety. Now, in the Senate has passed even before I got there, and I think, I don't know that we've passed it in the past year or two because I think we knew the House would take it up, but overwhelmingly passed the Senate to give the counties the ability for 1%. What the Senate has also passed, and I was there in the past 2 years for this, was for the ability for an amusement tax. And I think that once we get President-elect Smith on the phone, I think that's one of the things that we should certainly ask him about, because there's a large ski resort in Tucker County where he lives, and the ambulance and the fire service, the EMS, there is a huge strain on that, and it comes from out-of-state residents, out-of-state residents that come to the visitors that come to the ski resort. They get injured, and here comes the fire and EMS. Well, guess who pays for that? The residents of Tucker County, and so they struggle for that, and I think
they can't afford as many fire and EMS.
Right.
They have a small population, about 4,000.
Yeah. And I think what people really need to understand with this 1% sales tax is that the counties have the ability to raise certain fees already, and they can do that. But all those fees are going to be raised on residents of Berkeley County. If the county institutes either an amusement tax, a 1% sales tax, that's largely going to be paid by people traveling through out of state. Can you imagine the amount of people that get off Interstate 81 and shop, eat, whatever they do, spend money? That's not being paid for by the residents of our county. And if they don't do that, if the county doesn't have the ability to do that, and they say, okay, we have to raise money for fire and EMS and these things, public safety, then we're going to raise other fees. And those fees are going to be paid solely by Berkeley County residents. I think people hear 1% sales tax and they don't think about how much money that really means. If you take someone that makes $50,000 a year, they pay 25% of their income on their mortgage or their rent. They pay 25% of that in taxes. They probably pay 10% in utilities, 7 or 8% for groceries and things. So you're talking about a small portion. And so when you get that $50,000 you actually made, and you pay a few $1,000s a year on things subject to consumer sales tax, that's not a lot of money. But it does generate a lot of money to the county because there's so many people from out of state traveling through. One of the things that impact people every day that they don't think about is the tax on, the fees that they pay for their fire and casualty insurance on their home. And those premiums have to do with, there's an ISO rating that affects the premiums for homeowners. And some of the factors that impact your premium for your fire and casualty on your home are: what is the response time? How many fire departments are there? How many people are in those fire departments? What kind of training do they have? And so people are paying more money for their homeowners insurance because the fire and EMS services in some areas of the state, including this one, don't respond and don't have the ability to respond as quickly as they could. And if these ISO ratings were lowered, it would reduce their fire and casualty insurance on their home, which it would save them more than they're going to spend in the 1% sales tax. And people, again, just do the simple math. Don't look at 1% and say, oh my God, this is going to cost me thousands of dollars a year. No, it's not. And I've seen comments recently about, well, we'll just go to Winchester and we'll go to Frederick and we'll go spend money over there. Well, okay, go to Winchester and have dinner and see what the taxes are there. There's a 5% meals tax when you go into Winchester to pay. So,
and this isn't on groceries. Groceries are not taxable in West Virginia.
That's right.
And utilities.
Utilities, your medical expenses. So many of and this argument against it is always aimed at, well, this is going to hurt our seniors. Well, how much money do seniors spend on things subject to consumer sales tax? Very little. So I think that people need to understand the simple math of it, number one.
Well, as the senior sitting in the room here, I've got to push back on that. I think that there's no difference. They got more free time, and they go out and they buy more stuff. And
not all of us are your tax bracket.
Not everybody has your disposable income, John.
Well, no, but not all seniors are poor.
Patricia,
of course not.
Give your answer on this one.
Sure, thank you. So I'm enjoying listening to all of you guys, but I have to tell you that, again, I see it in a different way than you guys do. I'll just be honest about that. So I, like you, Delegate Hornby.
Mike, just go
well,
Mike.
there's two mics, so I feel like awkward. But anyways, so I'm not going to vote to raise taxes. That is not going to happen. I'm willing to consider ways to get this funded, and I'm also have voted for in the past and do support local control with transparency. Having said all of those things, I haven't heard most of the other counties in West Virginia request more funding in this way. They're just have different needs, and I think any type of bill like this, we need to take into account like how it's gonna. Like the needs of all of the 55 counties. One of the reasons for why, and I wasn't able to be at that meeting with the local guys, but one of the reasons for why I'm concerned about what they proposed is that a lot of the need for more funding for emergency services is because of the growth without planning that is going on in both of the counties I represent. So I'm trying to say it as politically as politely as I can, but you cannot have such a huge growth in population without balancing it out with businesses. And that's how most areas do balance the needs of the population and do balance their emergency services and the other services of government. And we're just not doing that very well in these two counties. And if I had been at that meeting with the local representatives, I would have brought this kind of thing up. It's like,
I want to push back just a little bit on what you're saying.
Doing on that?
You mentioned that you don't want to vote to raise taxes, and that's not what this bill does. The legislature is not voting to raise taxes. We're voting to give local control to local people. If the local people here in Berkeley County want to raise their own taxes, that's the opportunity we're giving them. We're not raising taxes. We're giving local control to the local people. So I don't know why you would look at it as you're making a vote on this to raise taxes.
No,
we're not.
I made the point that I'm not going to vote to raise taxes. But if there's a bill that is for local control, like you said, referendum, the folks get to choose it themselves.
I'm willing to discuss
I'm just letting you know that my own personal stance is that I do not want to vote to raise taxes.
I won't either.
Citizens.
Well, on that note, we're going to introduce Senate President Randy Smith that joined us on the phone. Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're joined by Senator Barrett, Senator Rucker, Delegate Height, and John Gilstrap and myself. Welcome to the roundtable. We're discussing local control, and we wanted your thoughts. I know you're from Tucker County, on an amusement tax or some kind of local control that would help emergency services.
Yes, well, I've been a supporter of the EMS, the amusement tax. I'm not big on raising taxes, but, as us as a state gave the counties responsibility to provide EMS services. So the county, by law or by code, has to provide EMS services. And, the state's notorious about forcing all this these mandates on the counties and municipalities, but never any funding to go with it. So that's one of the reasons that I have supported, representing Tucker County, which is a huge tourism county, and only having 6,500 residents until the weekend, and it goes up to 30,000 or more. It's a huge problem for them because you've got most of their land is either owned by the state or federal government or nonprofit.
You still there, Randy?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, you cut out for just a second.
Oh, sorry.
We're good.
But I don't know how much of that you caught about only 6,500 residents trying to provide service for 30,000 people there on the weekends.
And is that all through the winter months, Randy?
And summer.
Yeah, the winter months and the summer months, because we've got 2 state parks there, and so skiing in the wintertime and then camping and fishing and hiking in the summertime, and you have Thomas and Davis both have turned into tourist spots for especially the eastern part of the United States. So we really don't get a break. It's all year round.
This is John Gilstrap. I was a firefighter and EMT for years, and I can't help but think that the EMTs where you are have more experience in orthopedic injuries than any EMTs anywhere, maybe outside of Colorado. There's a fundamental disconnect, I think, in West Virginia politics, where we have the Republican supermajority, and the drumbeat is we want less. We want more freedom. We want closer government. We don't want to be run by big government. Yet home rule seems to have this great uphill battle. And if we take the tax, if we wave a magic wand and we say that any tax increase has to be a referendum, is there something fundamentally objectionable about home rule? The ability of local commissions, county commissions, and county councils to make decisions for their communities? And I would actually, the question that's coming up, I would talk about this in terms of education as well.
Go ahead, Randy.
It's kind of a I look at it as a kind of double-edged sword. There's parts of home rule that I agree with, and there are parts that I don't. When home rule gets into superseding state law, then I have a problem with that part, because state law supersedes county laws, just same as federal law supersedes state laws. So to allow them to supersede laws is a little bit different than allowing them to implement a 1% tax or 2% tax or an amusement tax or whatever. Because a lot of that you're getting into people's constitutional rights and freedom a lot of time.
I think, John, for me, it would be, there's a difference between home rule and a referendum. If you give home rule that it doesn't have guardrails, it can get out of control fast. And I think I'll come out publicly. Me personally, I probably won't vote for a sales tax increase in Berkeley County. That's just me. But I cannot take over 18,000 people in my district's voice and not give them that choice. So,
would the 1% sales tax be a decision that you would make in Berkeley County? Isn't that what the county commission would do?
I think that's what the commission would like, is to have a 1% sales tax put on a referendum that they can use for emergency services to provide paid firefighters to the county. I believe that's the nut of it. I'd like to see that referendum come back like a levy or a excess levy or a school bond or police levy. But that's just me.
So, Mike, as the author of the bill, or as an author of the bill, what's the nature of the pushback?
Well, I think the nature of the pushback with a lot of people is they don't want to be seen as raising taxes. I think you have to be able to explain that to the voters. I'm giving you the ability to raise taxes. I'm not the one raising taxes. Right now, you don't have that ability. If the people of Berkeley County, the majority of them, wanted to have SROs in every school, wanted to add paid firefighters or paid EMS people. Right now, they don't have the ability to do it because there's not the revenue to do it. So they would have to raise the money in some way to be able to do that. This would allow them, if they so chose, to do that, to generate that kind of money to do the things that they want to do. Right now, they would have to do it in a fee, so they would have to raise like the fire fee, or they would have to raise the ambulance fee. They would have to pay more in taxes in some way to give more money to the sheriff's department to put the SROs in the schools, or raise it through levies with the schools, school bonds or something like that, which means it would be everybody in Berkeley County that would be paying. And to Jason's earlier comments, a sales tax, a 1% sales tax, broadens that out. It's not just the people of Berkeley County paying it, it's the visitors paying it. It's the visitors who would use our EMS services or our fire services who would have accidents on I-81 and use the services that we provide here. So to me, giving the opportunity to the people here in Berkeley County to make that decision for themselves is a whole lot better than us dictating from Charleston whether or not we raise taxes or not.
Are you going to be reintroducing this?
I'm reintroducing the bill, my particular bill will always have the part in it where it has to go to referendum. I know there are other bills out there that may run as well.
And a combination of working with the Senate, with the House, say Mike's bill, say the amusement. I know that bill's kind of. You may see a combination of something that or a compromise that comes out of this that comes, or it may not get through at all. It's one of those things where it needs to be worked through the process. All the details need to be worked out. I know Berkeley County wants this, but there are other counties and there are other ramifications that if it just passes, like, oh, let's just pass this, you got to look at it from a very broad standpoint, in my point. All right, well, we've got about 60 seconds, so I'm going to end this segment early, and then we'll take a longer segment for the next. Randy, hang on a second. We're going to go to break, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. You're listening to TV10 and WNR. Welcome back to Eastern Panhandle Talk. Without Rob Mario, we are cruising through the day. I want to reintroduce who we have with us. We've got our co-host, John Gilstrap.
Good morning,
John. Senator Patricia Rucker. Good morning.
Good morning.
Senator Jason Barrett.
Good morning.
Delegate Height.
Good morning.
And on the phone, we have Senate President Randy Smith. Welcome back.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right, right over to you, John, for our last topic of the day. Or maybe we can get in two. You never know.
You never know. We'll see how long this goes, because it's an easy one. I want to talk about education. We all know the embarrassing statistics about education in West Virginia. We're 49th or 50th on all the things that are good, and we're high up in the numbers that are bad in terms of truancy and that sort of thing. On this show, we've done probably 100 interviews about the education system, and the drumbeat I hear, the recurring theme I hear, is there's really nothing we can do about it. I get that at the local level. I get it from the House of Delegates. I get it from the Senate. And everybody recognizes there's a problem, but no one body seems to have the capability to fix it. So I want to do a hypothetical here, that if I give you this magic wand where you can fix the education system and make classrooms a safe and productive place for students who want to learn, and for the teachers who want to teach them, what do we have to do to make it happen? And not what you can do as delegates, but as you get to change everything. You get to change hypothetically, you get to change the executive, you get to change all the Constitution. What do we need to do?
Yeah,
You want to lead?
Can we change the culture? And
No, you can't change the culture. That's the thing. You have to live with the culture we've got.
Well, so I have to tell you that obviously when it comes to education, it is a very, very difficult thing. And part of the reason it is so difficult is because it is a bureaucracy. It is the ultimate bureaucracy. I believe when public education began all those years ago, which it hasn't been for the entire history of the United States, it's relatively recent. When it began, the idea was we as a community want to make certain that everyone has the opportunity to get an education. And then how to go about that? Well, we'll fund schools in every community, every area, and give folks the opportunity to do it. It has become a major, major bureaucracy. And ideally, it should be controlled as locally as possible, which is why I've supported local control when it comes to the school decisions. But what are the things that really differentiate between a successful school and a non-successful school? When you drill down, and there's tons and tons of research into it, smaller class sizes make a difference. Having excellent leadership makes a difference. And when I say leadership, we're talking the principal, we're talking superintendent, the local leadership. We're not talking, state superintendent has almost no impact whatsoever on a successful public school. But the local leadership makes a huge difference. And you hear about schools that were failing and were able to be turned around because of the leadership. So those are the things that really make an impact. And it is not funding. You see successful schools that get a lot less funding than schools that are not successful and they get more funding.
Oh, West Virginia is in the teens, like 15th, 16th in the nation in terms of per capita funding.
Yes.
So that's
not the issue. So if I had a magic wand, I would tell you we would have training and ways to identify and find the very best leadership. And very often, we're not talking about teachers who just happen to become principals. A teacher's not necessarily going to make a good principal. A teacher's not necessarily going to make a good administrator. We really need to identify people that have the skill set to be good administrators in that leadership role. And then as much transparency and competition as possible. I do believe that the school choice that we have done in the last few years does help because it allows more accountability and it allows folks to pick out what it is that they want to see more of. And if we take advantage of that, if we actually look at it honestly, we'll make decisions based on that. Clearly, the folks are choosing this versus this.
You've mentioned transparency twice. What does that mean to you?
That folks know what is going on in the schools. That we are not hiding behind, we need to protect the privacy of the students. So we can't let the public know how well that school is doing, how well those teachers are doing, how well those kids are doing. And it's really being hidden, so folks don't know unless they're actually in the school experiencing it. And I'm sorry, I just don't believe that that's a good idea. When it comes to businesses, we get to shop, we get to choose where to shop, and we make decisions on what we know, on reviews. There's reviews for everything now, but we're not allowed to do that with schools because, somehow it makes hurt feelings. Well, I mean, that's just part of the process of knowing and making the best decisions is that you know what is going on in the school.
Senate Randy, you want to chime in here? See there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just took off mute. I think that one of the biggest problems we have in the state is, the amount of bureaucracy that's in the Department of Education. And most people don't realize that us as legislators don't have a whole lot of control over public education because basically, it's a separate branch of government. All other agencies that we pass laws on, pass bills, and send to the agency, they have to come up with a rule package and come back in front of on that bill and come before the legislature, and we approve it or change it or ask them to make, change something or improve something. but the education bills are not like that. The State Board of Education doesn't have to listen to the legislature. They can do the rules. We get to look at them, but if we don't like them, then, or something that we think's wrong, we can't change it because we don't have the authority. That's why I think, was it Amendment 4, where it gave legislators some oversight over the education system, and it failed. It was voted down by the state voters, and so a lot of the problems that we're having, that people were blaming legislators for, we're not to blame, because we don't have hardly any oversight over the education system. So that's a huge problem there. We take the blame, but we can't come up with any solutions unless it's what the State Board of Education is wanting. And and culture is another thing. The attendance or the attendance rate is a problem, and the opioid problem is a big driver behind some of that. In fact, a lot of it, and that's a huge problem that we're constantly trying to address. To be honest, if we could fix the drug problem in this state, or even this country, we would probably do away with close to 80% or maybe even more of the problems we have with domestic violence, child abuse, our CPS problem. All that is pretty much driven by the drug problem. And, we're heavy. Our State Board of Education has a lot of administration positions, more so than any other state around. We did a study several years ago, and I think Virginia had one administrator for every 4,000 students, and we had one for every 400 students. So that shows that a lot of the money isn't going to the teachers and to the classroom. It's going to the bureaucracy at the state level. And so, it's... and of course, the parents taking children out and putting them in private schools or homeschooling or micro schools or whatever. A lot of that is driven because it's huge in my district, but it's been driven by what they're forcing the teachers to teach. West Virginia's a conservative state, and we've got away from teaching subject matter, and we're trying to do a lot of indoctrination, and a lot of parents isn't putting up with that, and they're pulling their kids out of the public education system because they don't want a lot of this taught to their children, and that's their right. Same as someone that doesn't have a problem with it and wants their kids taught that. If that's the parents' right for their kids to be taught that. So that's where I think a lot of our problems are coming from. And of course, the answer to every agency on any problem is to throw more money, need more money. And that's how we've got where we're at with this huge bureaucracy, not only in education, but a lot of our agencies is we just throw money into it, but we don't change anything. And, a lot of people don't like change, but, we can't continue just keep throwing money and more money at a problem and not solve the problem, to come up with a solution. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Thanks, Randy. Jason.
Well, John, your question, I believe, is creating a safe learning environment for students.
Safe and productive.
Safe and productive environment. And Patricia's right that it's not for a lack of money. I mean, over 40% of our general revenue budget goes to education in this state. Recently, we've passed the Third Grade Success Act, which puts aides in classrooms. to me, it comes down to a couple simple things, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, because I think what Rainey and Patricia talked about with the bureaucracy is spot on, and I think very accurate. But Patricia mentioned class size, which I think is a key role. For the safety concern, SROs I think are important. You can't go into the state capitol without going through a metal detector. You can't go into the Berkeley County Judicial Center without going through, you can't even take your phone in there, let alone anything else. And you have to go through a metal detector. But yet, and there are armed guards there. So we have armed guards in this state for politicians, but we don't have SROs in every school, which I think is an injustice to our students and their safety. Senator Grady was on the show yesterday, I believe, and she mentioned a survey that was sent out to teachers all across the state. And the number one issue by far was the discipline in the classroom. And I think that is that may be the single biggest issue, at least in my opinion, of some of the issues that why children aren't succeeding and aren't learning. And I think she talked a little bit about having some problem students in the classroom, the inability to get them out. And it used to be that there were alternative schools within the public education system that children that had behavioral issues would go to that school. They would try to get them on the right track, give them more one-on-one, give them a smaller environment to work in, to be successful, and try to integrate them back into, I don't want to say the regular school because that's not fair, but the more traditional school. It's my understanding that they've kind of gotten away from that, is that they want to have all students in the same building together. And while I appreciate that, does that come at the expense of the other students that don't have a discipline problem? And I think it does. And so, for me, I think it's about empowering teachers and administrators to handle discipline issues, reducing class sizes, and having SROs in every school.
Where does that empowerment come from? In terms of discipline, is that a state law that we pass and say that it's okay for teachers to hit back and then we're done?
Well, I don't hit back.
Not hit back. I overgeneralization, but it could come to that, right? I mean, if you're in high school and there's a kid wailing on you.
I mean,
self-defense and smacking a kid is for being unruly is two different things.
I was in the classroom when things started to change. So when I was in school, I understood, that a teacher could discipline me and not paddle me, but you absolutely could be put in timeout. You could absolutely be denied privileges. You would miss recess. There were things that would happen to you. There would be consequences. And when I graduated from college and went back into that same public school system, all of a sudden it's like, no, you're not allowed to do anything or say anything.
You can't take recess away anymore.
Yeah, and the parents, instead of supporting the teacher when the teacher calls and says your student was disrespectful, would yell at you and blame you as it's your fault. So this is one of the reasons I was asking whether we're allowed to talk about the culture, because that cultural shift has made a huge, huge difference, and it is a real problem, and legislation is not going to fix it. I mean, we have to go back to a place where parents understand that they have a responsibility and that they need to be involved. And I will tell you, we're talking about wish lists, right? If we have a magic wand, I mean, if we can actually expel a student, and that parent now has to deal with their child, things would change.
Okay, how do we get that law? How do we get to the place? Because so much of this is common sense, right? If a kid, you talk about everybody has opportunity for education. That's what the public school system established. But these kids and their parents, through their kids, are squandering the opportunity that's been given to them. So from where I sit, having my high school years were 1971 and 1975, and trust me, if there's a fight in the hallway, Mr. Hartley was coming in there and somebody was bleeding and it was not him. Mm-hmm. It was a system that worked. Those were troubled times too. So how do we get Where is the decision made? At what level of government can the decision be made that, yeah, you can expel a kid, and now it's the teacher's problem?
You can at the high school level, middle school. It's a lot easier to go down those disciplinary routes. Senator Grady's bill is for elementary school, and I think that's where we're having a lot of the issues.
Okay, so
starting early.
In that case, you're not fighting
early.
back with the kid, but still to expulsion. A third grader who keeps other third graders from learning how to read is doing damage to all those other kids who are not reading. Time is inelastic.
Part of the problem is we have to pass a bill for what Senator Grady wants to do, and we have to pass that bill because it's not happening.
Because the administrator is counting on that kid $15,000 in an income for their school too.
And the biggest reason for that bill is permission. It's just they want to know you're going to have our back. We're not going to be sued and be left squandered when a parent decides to come after us for having done those things. Again, we could talk about how there's so many lawsuits, how there's, all of this, legalese now that really makes it hard to be a teacher.
But I think that's why I think that's why Senator Grady's bill is important, that it starts early and that it does try to change that culture at an early age, not just a culture within the classroom and the students, but also the culture with the parents as well, to let the parents know, okay, there are going to be consequences. We're going to take these children, unruly children, out of classrooms, and there's going to be consequences. And I think that's one of the issues, that we've lost consequences. You talk about waving a magic wand. There's many things that would have to happen if you're going to wave a magic wand. And I don't like the centralization of our education system right now. I don't like the fact that there's a Department of Education at the federal level, which we didn't used to have, that mandates things to the state, and then the state bureaucratic centralized government mandates things down to the local level. And now you have all this bureaucracy at the local level just trying to keep up with all the mandates so that they can continue to be funded, because you don't want the feds coming in and saying, we're not going to fund you because you didn't meet this mandate. And you don't want the state coming in and saying, we're not going to fund you because you didn't meet this mandate. So you're tying the hands of the local educators to do things. I think there's also been a move, because of lack of discipline, that schools have become these great social experiments rather than places of education. And we need to get back to the focus of ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and know that these are places where we're going to educate children. It's not about a social experiment. It's not about football and basketball either. That this is about education, and I think we have to get back to that kind of mentality where it's about education, and education at the lower levels. Yeah, I think at the local level.
And you asked for that wand. I'd start with the state Board of Education. That position should be elected. It shouldn't be appointed for 12 years by the governor. There is no accountability at the state level. Well, and then I'd come down, all the way down, and give the local Board of Education some teeth over their Board of Education, so that they are the elected officials. They need to hold the superintendent and all the teachers are responsible, and then you need to hold the parents responsible.
One of the other things that I don't like about the whole testing, and we talk about how West Virginia is ranked 49th, 50th all the time, is we don't test the same way that other states test. There's sort of like no standardized test that every state has to have the same measurements. When you play in a basketball game, one team doesn't get 2 points for a bucket and the other one get 3. It's the same. So I've heard that at 11th grade we test everybody through the SAT. Well, if we're testing every 11th grader and Maryland's testing
only 29% of our kids are going to college,
right? And Maryland's testing only college-bound students, then how are we going to get the same test results? How are we ever going to compete if we're testing everybody and they're just testing a select group?
I just want to point out the standardized testing that's on a 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade is standardized to the entire United States. It is the same test, the same set of questions to the same population. So that 11th grade thing, there is a difference. But we, the legislature, did decide that the federal government gave us the flexibility to do, instead of the standardized test at 11th grade, we could use a college-bound test so that it would be less testing for the students, because before they were doing a standardized test, and also those who wanted to go to college would take that. So that was a legislative act. We could go back to the way it used to be, but we actually reduced as much testing as possible. We now in the state of West Virginia only require the federal testing that's required, which is testing 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th grades.
We should give options in the 11th grade to students that maybe are going vocational or things where they don't have to take the SAT.
That's a discussion.
They can take
we could do that for certain.
Yes.
But I just wanted to make sure we were clear that it wasn't that, like, we chose that. So that was.
No, one of the things that Senator Grady mentioned on the air yesterday was she was very hopeful that her bill would have passed, but it never, the bell rang before it could be voted on. To me, I don't know how things work. Is there a way, assuming that there is support for this, and I'll bring up Randy for this, I guess, is there a way we can get that voted on, like, first instead of last?
Well, so this is where the politics comes in, right? We both had, the House and the Senate both had good ideas for a discipline bill. We merged those together. It takes some time to get through. What happened was, there were other multiple bills in the House that got 48 or 49 amendments on it. Sometimes our House members get a little in front of themselves, and suddenly we're spending 2 hours on a bill that we voted 89 to 11. And we're like, why did we just spend 2 hours debating or grandstanding or whatever you want to call it?
Christmas tree.
Or Christmas tree, yeah. So that bill was filibustered by the Democrats on purpose to make sure it didn't get through.
Why? What's the argument against it?
They like centralized bureaucracy.
Well, but it's also important enough not to wait to the last night to get that bill.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was a lot because of the changes being made. But no, the what can we do? We can do it earlier.
There we go.
Earlier in the session.
And I guarantee you will. I want to thank Senator Randy Smith for joining us today. I appreciate your time, sir.
I think he had to get off.
He had to get off. All right, well, we're going to take our last break anyway, so that works out perfectly. You're listening to TV10 and WRNR, Eastern Panhandle Talk. Welcome back to the last segment. We got about a minute left. I want to thank John Gilstrap for doing all the research and getting all those questions for us. I thought it was a lively discussion today. I want to thank you. And, of course, thank you for helping me yesterday, too.
Oh, certainly. It was a lot of fun. It's a lively group. I had no doubt.
You'll see a difference in your paycheck.
We don't mention paychecks here, Jason, okay?
Especially on Fridays.
Especially on Fridays, that's right. Patricia, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know it was a little confusing when I texted you and you thought we were just going to be meeting, but I wanted it public. So, again, Jason Barrett, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And my partner in crime, Mr. Height.
Hey, thanks for having me, and to all the people out there, prepare yourself. Snowmageddon is coming.
We'll have an inch, maybe two.
Yeah.
Well, it's supposed to be, 7 in Charleston? Are you guys going to go down early, or are you going to go down?
I'm going down Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I would expect all the bread and milk to be off the shelves by the end of today.
You're listening to Eastern Panhandle Talk. Rob will be back on Monday. Don't worry, folks. We'll be back to normal. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on Monday.